In a previous part of this presentation, I outlined the non-interventionist foreign policy advocated by America's founders, as well as presidents such as Grover Cleveland and Andrew Jackson. John McCain disagrees with these ideas and agrees instead with Theodore Roosevelt's militaristic, jingoistic expansionism. In the second presidential debate in 2008, McCain said outright, "My hero is a guy named Teddy Roosevelt." He gave a greater elaboration of his views of Roosevelt in a speech at the University of Southern California in 2002. McCain said, "Theodore Roosevelt is one of my greatest political heroes. The strenuous life was TR's definition of Americanism, a celebration of America's pioneer ethos, the virtues that had won the West and inspired our belief in ourselves as the new Jerusalem, bound by sacred duty to suffer hardship and risk danger to protect the values of our civilization and impart them to humanity. We cannot sit huddled within our borders," he warned, "and avow ourselves merely an assemblage of well-to-do hucksters who care nothing for what happens beyond." Now, the American founders, who advocated peace, commerce, and friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, in the words of Thomas Jefferson, are called by Teddy Roosevelt well-to-do hucksters, as well as others who follow the ideas of the founders, because they believe in peace and commerce, and not this strenuous life, not our sacred duty to endure hardship and risk and suffering for the sake of the country. Now, America and its civilization have prospered for over 130 years prior to the U.S. undertaking an expansionist foreign policy, without this ideal of the strenuous life being enforced, without the government forcing young men to go overseas and spill their blood for causes that are not their own, and in ways that are not beneficial in the long run to anybody. Teddy Roosevelt, in his speech before the Hamilton Club in Chicago in 1899, said, "If we are to hold our own in the struggle for naval and commercial supremacy, we must build up our power without our own borders." So much for a foreign policy devoted primarily to defense. So much for keeping out of entangling alliances. Because occupying another country is the most entangling kind of alliance one can imagine. Teddy Roosevelt disdained peace and, quote, commercialism, and advocated war, hardship, sacrifice, and militarism. In the same speech before the Hamilton Club, a truly frightening document if you read it, Teddy Roosevelt said, "We cannot, if we would, play the part of China and be content to rot by inches in ignoble ease within our borders, taking no interest in what goes on beyond them, sunk in a scrambling commercialism, heedless of the higher life, the life of aspiration, of toil and risk, busying ourselves only with the wants of our bodies for the day." He further said, "A life of slothful ease, a life of that peace which springs merely from lack either of desire or of power to strive after great things, is as little worthy of a nation as of an individual. I ask only that what every self-respecting American demands from himself and from his sons shall be demanded of the American nation as a whole." There are so many things wrong with these statements. First of all, a nation is not an entity in its own right. Teddy Roosevelt is reifying it here, thinking of it as something apart from the individuals constituting it. Second, Teddy Roosevelt denigrates peace and comfort and commercialism, trade, which bring to us all the economic, cultural, social, emotional benefits of civilization. He believes that there's something else, something greater than the everyday virtues toward which we aspire routinely. And he denigrates those everyday virtues, denigrates them as too mundane, not noble enough, not glorious enough, And instead of our attempts to strive for peaceful, comfortable, fulfilling everyday lives, he advocates war, hardship, sacrifice, suffering, bloodshed, the elimination of everything desirable that we strive for on an everyday basis. And that, I submit, is abhorrent. Teddy Roosevelt says, "We do not admire the man of timid peace. We admire the man who embodies victorious effort, the man who never wrongs his neighbor, who is prompt to help a friend, but who has those virile qualities necessary to win in the stern strife of actual life." Now, there's nothing wrong with never wronging one's neighbor or helping one's friend. But Teddy Roosevelt clearly sees certain virile qualities which are apart from that. If America today has a problem with machismo, this man, I believe, is one of the contributing factors. Because he believes that conventional bourgeois morality of honesty, decency, integrity, the willingness to better one's own life and the lives of those around one, that's not enough. One needs something else, according to Roosevelt. And a person who is gentle, who is civil, who is courteous, who is mild-mannered, is the man of timid peace. Teddy Roosevelt doesn't even believe that that's a real man. He wants a real man to be tough and destructive. But why? Why is it a virtue of manliness to want to go out and destroy things and shoot them up? I don't understand. Teddy Roosevelt said, "When men fear work or fear righteous war, well it is that they should vanish from the earth, where they are fit subjects for the scorn of all men and women who are themselves strong and brave and high-minded." Now, it's not just war that Teddy Roosevelt extols. He condemns even the fear of war. He believes that even recognizing the horrors of war and being reluctant to enter into them is a vice. No, he wants gung-ho jingoism. He wants people to gladly march off onto war, as did many young men prior to World War I, thinking it was going to be some romantic adventure. Teddy Roosevelt, of course, greatly spurred on this kind of enthusiasm, and these men were mowed down by the tens and hundreds of thousands in the trenches, not knowing what they were in for. This is what this crazy, fearless attitude results in. Furthermore, Teddy Roosevelt condemned the timid man, the lazy man, the man who distrusts his country, the over-civilized man who has lost the great fighting, masterful virtue. These are the men, he said, who fear the strenuous life. So being over-civilized is bad, according to Teddy Roosevelt. Is it not the great goal of all of us ordinary, decent human beings to try to become more civilized, to try to acquire better standards of living, higher culture, a better understanding of the human condition? Teddy Roosevelt denigrates all of this. He thinks there can be too much civilization. Instead, he favors the primitive, aggressive man who likes to tear things apart and beat people over the head with clubs. It's a disgusting view of what is desirable. And furthermore, Teddy Roosevelt, as most historians will admit, was one of the only few American presidents who saw war not as a necessary evil, but as actually a positive good. He glorified war as an opportunity rather than an occasion of great devastation. He said, if there is not the war, you don't get the great general. If there is not a great occasion, you don't get a great statesman. If Lincoln had lived in a time of peace, no one would have known his name. Well, I submit to you that having tens or hundreds of thousands of people die in a war is far too high a price to pay for getting a great general or a great statesman. Roosevelt does't think so, of course. And moreover, if Lincoln had lived in a time of peace, we would all be much better off, because Lincoln was exactly the kind of warmongering leader whom we don't want in office again. He instituted a draconian form of conscription. He suspended habeas corpus. He jailed his intellectual opponents just for criticizing him. And the Civil War primarily was not fought over the issue of slavery. It was fought in order to essentially prevent secession from the Union by the Southern states.